Phoenix is one of the older creature types in Magic the Gathering. It made its debut in 1994's Legends with Firestorm Phoenix, and just like phoenixes in the folklore of the real world, phoenixes in Magic don't stay dead. This was first established with Firestorm Phoenix, which would return to your hand when it died, and every other phoenix that has ever been printed has some mechanism by which it doesn't stay dead in one way or another. While Dragon is technically Red's iconic creature type, in other words, a type that largely appears at higher rarities and tends to appear in every set while also being very powerful, Phoenixes are also sort of an honorary iconic type for Red, as they also tend to be powerful cards that appear predominantly in Red and at higher rarities, although they don't appear quite as regularly as Dragons do. Because Phoenixes come with recursive abilities, something that is inherently powerful, they have performed quite well at Magic's highest level of competition. Of the 36 that have been printed, 20 of them have at least one top 8 at a major Magic event. This is the second time I've done an MTG top 10 on Phoenixes, but I did it the first time over 6 years ago in February of 2019. As you'd expect, the list has undergone a lot of change over the last 6 years. In this video, we'll look at the 5 Phoenixes that have fallen off the list since 2019, and we'll also look at the 10 Phoenixes that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. Alright, before we get to the top 10, let's look at the 5 Phoenixes from the 2019 list that didn't make it this time, starting with Flame-Wreathed Phoenix, which was at number 10 last time. For 2 generic and 2 red, it's a 3/3 with flying and tribute 2. This means when it enters, an opponent can pay the tribute by putting 2 +1/+1 counters on it, but if the tribute isn't paid, it gains haste and, when this creature dies, return it to its owner's hand. In other words, you make your opponent choose between giving you a 4 mana 5/5 flyer or a 4 mana 3/3 flyer with haste that returns to your hand when it dies. Both of those are pretty good deals for the mana, but the fact your opponent can choose which to make this into is kind of a bummer. Sometimes you really need haste or you really need a 5/5 and you just won't get it. That's why this Phoenix really didn't see much play, achieving only a single top 8 way back in 2014, and it won't ever find its way back onto this list, which now took 9 points to qualify. Next there's Bogardan Phoenix, which was at number 9 last time. It was the second Phoenix ever printed, and it's 2 generic and 3 red for a 3/3 with flying, and if it dies, you exile it if it has a death counter on it, otherwise you return it to the battlefield under your control with a death counter on it. In other words, this particular Phoenix can only pull off its Resurrection Act a single time in most cases, but 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer that came back once was a pretty good deal back in 1997. Bogardan Phoenix put up a top 8 at the Mirage Block Pro Tour, appearing in a red aggro deck, but that's the only top 8 it ever achieved. Next, there's Akoum Firebird, which was at number 7 last time. It also has the distinction of being the only Phoenix on the list without Phoenix in its name. For 2 generic and 2 red, it's a 4/4 with flying and haste that has to attack each combat if able. It can come back from the graveyard via landfall, as if the Firebird is in your graveyard when you have a land enter the battlefield under your control, you can pay 4 generic and 2 red to return this to the battlefield. You get a reasonably efficient haste flyer up front, and then you can bring it back in the late game to help you close things out. It was played in standard mono red decks, but doesn't have any top 8 since 2017. Next, there's Shard Phoenix, which came in at number 6 last time. It was also the 3rd Phoenix ever printed. For 4 generic and a red, it's a 2/2 flyer, and you can sacrifice it to deal 2 damage to each creature without flying. You can also spend 3 red mana during your upkeep to return the Phoenix to your hand if it's in your graveyard. The fact you can keep on recurring it and doing 2 to the board is a real pain for your opponent too, especially if they're relying on smaller creatures. In Standard, it was played in Survival of the Fittest decks. These were toolbox decks that could use Survival to tutor up creatures ideal for a given situation, and Shard Phoenix is one of the creatures that you wanted to grab against aggressive opponents. It's also pretty nice that if you discard the Phoenix to Survival, you can always get it back later. In Extended, it was played in Oath of Druids decks. This powerful enchantment lets you put the top creature from your library into play for free if you have fewer creatures than your opponent, and the Phoenix was one of the few creatures the deck ran. while it wasn't the deck's win condition to hit with Oath of Druids, it was a creature you could get with the Oath and sacrifice to eliminate threats, and the fact it left your board was a good thing because it meant you could trigger Oath again next turn. However, Shard Phoenix doesn't have any top 8 since 2006. Lastly, there's Kuldotha Phoenix, which came in at number 5 last time. For 2 generic and 3 red, it's a 4/4 with flying and haste, making it one of the largest phoenixes in the game, and it can return to the battlefield by way of Metalcraft, because if you control 3 or more artifacts, you can pay 4 generic to return Kuldotha Phoenix from the graveyard to the battlefield during your upkeep. That's a pretty good way to spend 4 generic mana, especially if you're out of gas, as bringing this thing back and slamming in for 4 is a pretty big deal. Kuldotha Phoenix's top 8s all came at the Scars of Mirrodin block Pro Tour, where it was played in red aggro decks with an artifact theme. However, like the other Phoenixes who have lost their spot on this list, it has no chance to make it back on the top 10, which is kind of a flavor fail because it'd be nice if some of these Phoenixes could manage to have a second life in competitive Magic, but I don't think it's in the cards. Alright, now that we've looked at these fallen Phoenixes, let's move to the top 10 proper, but before we do, I want to ask you to take a moment and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm closing in on 100,000 subscribers, and I'd love to reach that milestone by the end of the year. It's free to subscribe, and if you do, you'll always be well aware of the multiple pieces of Magic content I put out every week, so hit that subscribe button and help me out. At number 10, it's Bloodfeather Phoenix, a newcomer to the list that wasn't printed until 2023. For 1 generic and a red, it's a 2/2 flyer that can't block. It can come back from the graveyard with burn spells, because when an instant or sorcery you control deals damage to an opponent or battle, you can pay 1 red mana to return the Phoenix to the battlefield, and it gains haste until end of turn. So yeah, this Phoenix is all about doing damage. I mean, it can't block, so its purpose is to attack, and it loves it when you burn your opponents or their battles, and will join the fray when you do, coming back and swinging for 2 damage right away. Unsurprisingly, Bloodfeather Phoenix was played in red deck wins while it was in standard, in other words, mono-red aggro decks packing plenty of burn. It also picked up a single top 8 in Pioneer in a similar deck, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2023, and if I revisit this list again in 6 years, there's a good chance it won't be here. At number 9, it's Aurora Phoenix. Another newcomer to the list, Aurora Phoenix was only printed in 2020. For 4 generic and 2 red, it's a 5/3 with flying and Cascade, which means that when you cast it, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less, then you can cast that card without paying its mana cost. In other words, when you cast this Phoenix, you end up getting a whole additional card for free, which is pretty good when you're adding a big flyer to the board. Aurora Phoenix also really loves Cascade because when you cast a spell with it, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand. Aurora Phoenix has only been printed in Commander sets, and that means the only 60 card formats it's legal in are Legacy and Vintage, and all of its points have come in the former, where it probably doesn't surprise you that it's been played in Cascade-centric creative technique decks. Actually, Cascade-centric is probably an understatement, because the deck is built entirely around cascading a bunch in a single turn until you cast your entire deck and win the game. Every single non-land in the deck is either a creative technique, a really sweet card to cast for free, like Emrakul, or a card with Cascade, like this Phoenix. This ultimately results in every single card in the deck being cast, which results in a board full of big scary creatures, one of which is Maelstrom Wanderer, and that gives all of your creatures haste, and you can attack with your board of Phoenixes and other Cascade creatures to win the game. However, Aurora Phoenix doesn't have any top 8 since 2023, so like Bloodfeather Phoenix, it might not be on the list for long, although it is more difficult to count it out since Cascade is so easily abused. At number 8, it's Chandra's Phoenix, which has fallen 5 spots since 2019. For 1 generic and 2 red, it's a 2/2 with flying and haste, and it can come back from the graveyard to your hand anytime an opponent is dealt damage by a red instant, sorcery, or red planeswalker you control. So like Bloodfeather Phoenix, Chandra's Phoenix really likes it when you do burn damage to your opponent. Burn decks often have to worry about running out of gas before they can finish the opponent off, but being able to effectively draw this Phoenix from your graveyard anytime you burn them makes it a lot harder for you to run out of gas. Chandra's Phoenix was played in mono red and Boros burn decks while it was in standard, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2014. At number 7, it's Ashcloud Phoenix, which has taken quite the tumble from the number 2 spot it held in 2019. For 2 generic and 2 red mana, it's a 4/1 with flying and morph, which means you can pay 3 generic mana to cast it as a face-down 2/2 creature. Its morph cost is 4 generic and 2 red, and that's the cost you can pay to turn it face up, and when this Phoenix gets turned face up, it does 2 damage to each player. When Ashcloud Phoenix dies, you also return it to the battlefield face down, meaning as long as you get this thing face up again, it's going to keep on coming back, usually after doing like 6 damage to your opponent. Ashcloud Phoenix's points all came in standard, where it appeared primarily in aggro decks, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2016. At number 6, it's Flamewake Phoenix, which is at number 4 last time. For 1 generic and 2 red mana, it's a 2/2 with flying and haste, and it has to attack each turn if able. And as a Teamer Phoenix, Flamewake Phoenix can come back from the graveyard using the original Teamer mechanic, Ferocious, which means you get something good if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. In this case, at the beginning of combat, you can pay 1 red mana to return the Phoenix to the battlefield. That's a super efficient way to bring a Phoenix back, even if it does demand a little bit of setup. While in Standard, it managed only 2 second-tier top 8s, one in a Rakdos control deck, and another in red deck wins. It really took off though in modern Hollow 1 decks, which are ready-made for this Phoenix. This deck specializes in discarding a ton of cards to cast Hollow 1 for free, or at least for very little mana. It just so happens that Hollow 1 is a 4/4, so being able to cast a Hollow 1 on turn 1 and discarding your Flamewake Phoenixes on the way there means that you can be attacking for 6 on turn 2. These decks can get lethal on you in a hurry, and Flamewake Phoenix is a big part of that. While modern Hollow 1 decks took a step back for a while as a result of the ban of Faithless Looting, the Phoenix did find a new home in the somewhat similar Asmorano Diced-in Kuldotha deck, which also looks to discard cards to cast a super cheap 4/4. Then, at the end of 2024, Faithless Looting got unbanned, and this has unsurprisingly resulted in a resurgence of Hollow 1 decks in the format. Flamewake Phoenix also got a reprint in Foundations, meaning it's in Standard right now and will be for some time, and while it doesn't currently have a home in the format, that might change in the future, although it isn't like it was a heavily played card in Standard last time around either. Flamewake Phoenix is active right now in Modern though, and it's likely to add to its score in the future, so it may move higher on this list in the long run. At number 5, it's Detectives Phoenix, a newcomer that was only printed a few months ago in 2024, making it the newest card on the list, which makes it all the more impressive that it's already at number 5. For 2 generic and a red, it's a 2/2 enchantment creature with flying and haste, and it also has Bestow, which means you can cast this for an alternate casting cost, and if you do that, it's an enchantment aura with enchant creature instead. The Bestow cost here is 1 red mana and collect evidence 6, which means you have to exile cards from your graveyard with a combined mana value of 6 or greater, and then the enchanted creature gets +2/+2 flying and haste. And of course, this Phoenix can come back by way of that alternate casting cost, because you can cast it using Bestow from the graveyard. One important thing about Bestow that isn't immediately intuitive, especially on a card without the full reminder text, is that when the creature it enchants dies, Detectives Phoenix will stick around as a creature. So you get all the upside of a pretty powerful cheap aura, including the additional upside of casting it from the graveyard that way, with none of the risk of getting 2 for 1 by removal, as can happen with typical auras. And in general, the value this can give you out of a well-stocked graveyard is pretty great, since it can make mini creatures much scarier. Detectives Phoenix is from Modern Horizons 2, and that means the only 60 card formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and it's gained most of its points in Modern, where like Flamewake Phoenix, it's appeared in Asmorano and Hollow 1 decks, while also appearing in other graveyard-oriented decks like Death Shadow or Murktide Regent decks. Its 1 Legacy point also came in a Regent deck. Detectives Phoenix is going to keep putting up top 8s in Modern, and there's a very good chance it continues to move up the list going forward. At number 4, it's Phoenix Chick, a newcomer to the list that was only printed in 2022, and definitely the cutest Phoenix ever, and also the smallest and cheapest Phoenix ever printed. It costs 1 red mana for a 1/1 with flying and haste that can't block, and it can come back from your graveyard whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, as long as you pay 2 red mana, and if you do, it returns to the battlefield tapped and attacking with a +1/+1 counter on it. Most of the Phoenixes we've seen on this list are pretty aggressive, but I think it's safe to say that this is the most aggressive Phoenix, simply because it's a 1-drop that can chip in for tons of damage, and then come back from the graveyard and keep the party going while doing even more damage. All of that has made the Chick one of the best 1-drops for red aggro decks in Standard and Pioneer, and it's going to continue to put up top 8s in both formats, and it's likely to move up a few spots in the future. At number 3, it's Phoenix of Ash, a newcomer to the list that was printed in 2020. For 1 generic and 2 red, it's a 2/2 with flying and haste, like many of the Phoenixes on the list, and you can pay 2 generic and a red to give it +2/+0 until end of turn. It's from Theros Beyond Death, a set with its own graveyard mechanic, Escape, And that's how this Phoenix can come back. Escape is an alternate casting cost you can use when a card is in the graveyard. In this case, you pay 2 generic, 2 red, and exile 3 other cards from your graveyard, and when the Phoenix escapes, it comes with a +1/+1 counter. Phoenix of Ash can hit really hard and quickly, thanks to its pseudo fire breathing and stat line, and your opponent just killing it once isn't going to put an end to things. In fact, this Phoenix will come back bigger and better than ever. It's yet another Phoenix that was played in red aggro decks while it was in Standard, and while it's put up a few top 8s in other formats, it doesn't have any top 8 since 2023, and I think Phoenix Chick will be passing it in the near future. At number 2, it's Rekindling Phoenix, which was dethroned from its number 1 slot that it held in 2019. For 2 generic and 2 red, it's a 4/3 with flying, and it can return to the battlefield using a unique token, because when it dies, you create a 0/1 red elemental creature token with, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature and return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn. In other words, provided that token sticks around, you don't have to pay anything to bring this Phoenix back, and in fact, it'll come back packing haste, so your opponent killing the Phoenix on your last turn is made up for in a big way. Now, it is true that your opponent can kill the token, but if they do that after killing your Phoenix, you're still getting a 2-for-1, since they killed the Phoenix with 1 card and the token with another. Rekindling Phoenix's top 8s have all come in red aggro decks in Standard, Historic, and Pioneer, but it doesn't have any top 8 since early 2024, so I think it's going to slip down the list in the future. And at number 1, by almost 100 points, it's Arclight Phoenix, which has rocketed up the list from its number 8 slot from last time. It was a very new card when I made the last list and only had a single first-tier top 8 to its name, but as you can see, the last 6 years have been great for Arclight Phoenix. For 3 generic and a red, it's a 3/2 with flying and haste, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've cast 3 or more instant and sorcery spells this turn, you return the Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. A 4-mana 3/2 with haste and flying isn't very good, but you know what is? A 0-mana 3/2 with flying and haste, and that's what this amounts to in the decks that play it. Sure, you do have to cast spells, but those spells are giving you whatever their effects are, in addition to ultimately bringing back at least 1 Arclight Phoenix. The Phoenix has been strong enough to power eponymous decks in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and even Legacy, and it's been especially successful in Pioneer and Modern. Generally, it sees play alongside other creatures who like it when you cast lots of cheap spells, and that can help you put Phoenixes in the graveyard, like Ledger Shredder and Dragon's Rage Channeler. Those decks can do tons of damage in a hurry thanks to the presence of lots of good cheap spells. Arclight Phoenix is going to continue to find success in Modern and Pioneer, and it's only going to pull further ahead of all the other Phoenixes in Magic the Gathering, because it is, quite clearly, the best Phoenix ever printed. So, those are the top 10 Phoenixes in Magic the Gathering. Do you like red creatures who don't stay dead? If so, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at specific creature types, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.